Thank you, Mal. Hello, everybody. Firstly, fantastic congratulations to all of the team behind putting this on. It's really great to see it happening in Dundee. I just wanted to take 15 minutes of your time to really talk about two things. One, just to reflect a bit on what I and a lot of my colleagues have learned in our work to support early stage games teams. And then I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the project that we run at the moment and some of the exciting things that are going to happen in the future, hopefully. So the first thing, the numbers that you can see at the moment, that's really talking about how I failed over the last 18 years. That's the bottom number, is the timeline. So I've been plugging away at this for 18 years to try and find a good way and an effective way to support early stage games teams. And that's particularly in the context of teams who are minded towards some kind of commercial business startup. That's the kind of area that we're focused on. And obviously, there are lots of great reasons why a team of games developers might come together to build games for fun or for cultural reasons or for artistic reasons or just to keep themselves happy. That's great. But it just so happens that what we've been trying to do is to see how we can support early stage teams and help them grow. And over that time, the number varies according to how you count it. There's probably been about 350 small teams that have come past my door or my projects in some shape or form. And probably out of those 350, I guess there are around 100 surviving as some kind of entity. Now that at first seems reasonably high, but actually one of the reasons for that is we've just been marching away over the last 3 or 4 years doing a lot of support for early stage startups, and most of those are still around yet. They haven't had a chance to fail. But when you really look hard and you really look at those companies that are successful, and by that I mean companies who are employing a reasonable number of people, Coatsink, for example, in the northeast of England, who we supported 3 or 4 years ago, are now 40 to 50 employees. To me, that's a success. Blazing Griffin, recently raised 5 million quid. To me, that's a success. You might have seen Hutch Games recently, and what was it? Somewhere around 1 million downloads or something for their latest game. To me, that's a success, and they've also raised money. But how many of those teams we can turn into those success stories is a continuing challenge that I haven't really found the answer to. But the thing I was just going to share with you was really 5 of the key things that we've seen as being success factors that are present in those 10 or so that we see as real successes. The first thing, and actually I should say, I'm not claiming there's any massively insightful thing here. You probably look at that list and say, this is stating the bleeding obvious, but they are certainly the things that we've found as key success factors in the teams that have ended making that journey right through and becoming one of those 10 or so who are surviving, growing, raise money, employing people, doing good stuff. And the first thing, crucially, is that those founding members do share a vision, and they do actually have a vision for what they want to do, and they all understand that vision. And if you were to talk to any one of them individually, they'd probably be saying the same thing. There might be a little bit of creative disagreement. That's not a bad thing. But they need to have the kind of single-mindedness as an entity to be pursuing that goal. That's a pretty crucial thing. The next thing is something that's we've debated a lot over the last, particularly recently, as we've looked at companies and teams struggling between trying to bring off the big shiny thing and deliver it and impress everyone and really wow them, versus actually nailing something, getting it out of the door, getting some revenue for it, and learning from that process. And again, when we reflect and look at those companies that have done well, most of them didn't get hung up on a passion project early on. Most of them did go and nail something. Some of them even did it with other people's IP. They actually just repurposed other people's IP, went out there, did it, got some revenue coming in, and learned from that, learned about the audience, learned what they might have to do if they were shaping their own IP. And that learning process through shipping is a really critical thing. I mentioned the passion project because that comes alongside that, but it really is one of those things that so many times, and we see it with the applications to the Games Fund, people are coming along with something that it's wonderful to be ambitious, it's wonderful to have these fantastic creative ideas, but frankly, it's something that just isn't doable within the scope of resources that they're likely to ever be able to marshal. Number 4 is again really important in terms of there being a person, a hustler. People use all sorts of terms. I haven't used the word entrepreneur there because that kind of gets bandied about in different ways. But there really does have to be someone who can lead and be the key spokesperson. And great if there's more than one, as long as you're fairly consistent in what you say to potential investors. But the key thing is there does have to be someone who's a front person and who begins to really talk the talk, who always, at all times, has that key vision in their head and is able to, at the drop of a hat, without any rehearsal, almost stand up and pitch the company and the opportunity, talk about what they've done, talk about that thing that you did ship and what you learned from it. That's the kind of thing that impresses people. And it's an old cliche that you hear time and time again from investors that, in the end of the day, the investors invest in the people and not the game or product. And it is around the people, the management team, the whole mix of that will tip an investor over the edge and say, I really like this team. I'm going to put some money into it because they really understand where they're coming from with this project. And then finally, you really have to know every twist and turn of what's happening with your audience and around your vision. You really have to understand that. It's a combination of the other 4 points, really. But it's important for as many people on the team to know that. It's important to not ignore the signs from analytics and to build that into your thinking, to react to it even if it's telling you things that you really don't want to hear. You've really got to listen, you've really got to respond to that. And like I say, when we look back at those teams that have come through, and as I say, this is over quite a long period of time, it's the ones that have managed to nail those fairly 5 seemingly simple, but actually pretty hard things in a consistent way who will end up being commercially successful, if indeed that is your goal, to be commercially successful, because as I said at the start, there might be all sorts of other exciting reasons for building games and having fun and doing good stuff. That's absolutely fine. I'm not saying don't do that. The key thing is, if you are commercially minded, do it right. Don't waste time thinking that you're going to make a success of it by not doing these things. So this really just to talk a little bit, to move on from that, and for those of you who don't know, our core projects are Transfuser and the UK Games Fund. Transfuser is a summer competition for teams of graduates across the UK who work together for 10 weeks, creating a prototype game that they bring to the EGX event in Birmingham at the end of this month, and show it off to the public and get judged. And then they feed into our UK Games Fund as a potential applicant that's kind of then fast-tracked. And the core UK Games Fund has been providing grants, again, across the UK to companies normally with about £25,000 of prototype funding. And the whole reason we're doing that, and the reason why we've got public money to do that, is really to do with that kind of games ecosystem you can see shown a little bit in the diagram there. What we find, and our case to government in terms of there being public funding coming into what we're doing, is that if you start to invest in this early stage, and if you start to help teams and they start to create original IP, all of that real project is real world learning. And that has this tremendous ripple effect across the whole of the ecosystem in terms of building talent and building not just the companies and the startups that might come through to be some of those 10 at some point. And by the time they get to that stage, then they're starting to return tax revenues to the government and pay some of this investment back. It's also about a kind of creating a vibrant freelancer community, because there's a big kind of ripple effect into the kind of contracting sector in terms of the companies that we help. So that's why we do that. And again, I'm zipping through because I've only got a 15-minute slot here, and I just wanted to tell you about a couple more innovation projects. The first one that we're trying to do, and anyone who applies to us in the future is going to be able to benefit from a new games pipeline platform that we're about to launch. And because we work a lot with publishers and investors, we've got a whole load of them interested on being in a kind of almost like a closed crowdfunding site is the best way of describing it, although it's not about crowdfunding. But the way that projects are presented to our portfolio of investors and publishers is very similar to that which you'd see on somewhere like Kickstarter. And all of the companies that are in our portfolio are going to be able to profile themselves like that. And this will apply to anyone who applies to us, whether they're funded or not in time. And that'll mean that we're going to be able to sort of capture a lot more projects and expose them to potential funders in the future. We hope to be launching that later this month at EGX, and it'll gradually roll out. So if any of you who put your hands up who are in kind of early stage companies who are thinking about applying to us, you'll get an opportunity to be profiled in that, which even if you don't get money from us, could be something that's useful, because sometimes you find publishers and platforms are looking for a particular IP or a particular type of team that they find it kind of hard to discover. The second innovation project is the work we're doing with the blockchain. And this is where we're looking much harder at the way that early stage teams start out. And over those 18 years, with those 350 odd projects, the number of times I've seen early stage companies almost be forced into forming a company when they don't really need one. They're a group of people who are coming together to create a games IP. And if there was a good way of divvying up how that IP was distributed between those people who were creating it early on, they could probably defer setting up a company for quite a while. And these days, the requirements of having a company are getting more and more onerous in terms of not filing annual returns and kind of potential fines. And a lot of those early stage companies that I've helped, where the people aren't successful and they fragment and go their separate ways, then someone doesn't fill an annual return in and they get fined, a few £100 or whatever. So we want to kind of avoid that. But we also think having that discipline for the whole creative team to have shares in the IP is a really important one, because ultimately we want to take this right through to the sales platform level, so that on a platform where there's maybe a 70% cut and the platform's retaining 30%, that 70% can be distributed according to the IP shares between the individual creators and not be going into an entity. And it could be a much more democratic approach for some teams in their early days. Obviously, once they get more successful, they can probably use this almost to form the founders or the term sheet and go on down the conventional route. So what we've done, essentially working with the Digital Catapult in London, is to create a piece of tech where teams will be able to define shares in their games IP, and the game, when they sign up and they record those shares, they'll be recorded in a transparent distributed ledger using Ethereum in the way that you've probably seen a number of other blockchain projects. But this one's going to be important in terms of it being a kind of open and transparent share registry that our teams are going to be able to use going forward, meaning that they're always going to be able to profile the ownership of their IP between them. And I've got time to wrap it up, just about. I've just got one more slide, which is our big shiny project locally. Some of you may have heard about it. It's got a kind of tagline of being a studio tell, and it's a project that we've got in the city deal bid at the moment. And if we manage to pull this off, and it's actually going to be pretty challenging to do it, what we're aiming to do is to bring all of the learning that we've had with our transfuser project and put it in one building. And that would mean that, for example, the 23 teams that we've got dotted about the UK at the moment, we'd be bringing them all to the city. They'd be able to stay in the building. They'd be able to work in the studio in the building. There'd be a big showcase area in the building that they'd be able to put the game on show that they've built during that project. And there'd be a host of other facilities. And of course, we'd be using our blockchain share record mechanism. So that's it from me, a bit of a quick run through. I'm not sure if there's time for any questions. I'll have to defer to the shake of the head there, so there isn't. But I'll be outside in a moment because I'm keeping you all from lunch, and you can always grab me quickly and ask me a question. But thanks very much.